So performing impact analysis requires the following steps. You need to have the incident reports as they're either coming in or as after it's happened. You need to assign that function to someone. You need to have someone that either understands the business functionality of where you work, or you need to have someone that at least documented it and begin conducting it. NIST 861 is a helpful source for this. If you're more internationally minded, ISO 27003 is also a good guide to conducting incident management, as was 830 for risk management and 27001 for risk management as well. So, methods for prioritizing. Part of impact analysis is determining how important an incident is. This goes back to the triage thing. Just as preparing to conduct triage is important, actually conducting it is probably the bigger deal, because if you have two things that are pretty important come at the same time and they're both impacting different systems, you need to know what is important and what isn't. Most organizations have limited resources to deal with incident impact analysis. It may be more important to actually put a lid on an incident than it is to determine its impact right at that moment. So anything you can do beforehand to make it easier is important. Use your answers that you thought about previously to really drive that impact assessment as you're doing it. Use that plan that you made and be diligent about documenting. All right, so incidents targeting IT systems typically impact business functionality to those systems they provide or those systems that they create dependencies to. So a good example for this is any communications or email system in an organization. The failure of those systems can have an impact on the function of both, many dependent systems that exist above them. So your organization might have some sort of financial goals, and the inability of your employees to communicate through whatever system it is they use, like email, can be a big impact for that organization, especially considering maybe there's a deadline due, and maybe impact is greater at a particular time when communication is disabled. Some considerations for functional impact. You should really consider how the incident will impact the existing functionality of affected systems, even if maybe that functionality is degraded at the moment. Sometimes you might have to impact the functionality of a business process more in order to resolve the incident. So that's something that you need to take into consideration. It might be more important to provide degraded service than it is right at the moment to fix an incident. Incident handlers should consider not only the current functional impact of incidents, but also the future functional impact of an incident if it's not immediately contained. The corollary to the one previously, that it might be more important to continue providing service, is that perhaps impact of an incident can spread if it's not properly contained, or if you simply don't pull the Band-Aid off and fix it right at that particular moment. So how do you determine functional impact? So what does your prior organization's risk assessment say about particular compromised functions of assets? This goes back to the importance of having the plan. If you don't have that plan, you're at a big disadvantage, because learning about your organization's functions and processes during an incident is really, really difficult. So in short, have that plan, be able to look at that plan. Ask the question, to what degree is the compromised function disabled or degraded? Maybe in a particular instance it's not critical to fix it right now, or maybe impact-wise it'll harm the organization more to fix it now than it will later or a couple hours down the road. So is a compromised function partially usable or completely disabled? When you're cataloging functions and dealing with an incident that is impacting a function, it's important to think about the different levels a function or process might exist at. So you might have partial service in a particular process or function, or you might have very small impacts to services or functions. Just think about those as you're handling the impact analysis of a particular incident. Do you have a legal mandate to ensure a specific level of functionality for this particular service? We already referenced this, but the legal mandate is a very real thing for a lot of industries. Health obviously has a legal and moral mandate to provide care and maintain their functionality. Maintaining functionality of a service or asset put additional information or functions at risk. This goes back to the idea that putting off impact analysis or resolving an incident can have additional impacts out beyond the processes or functions already being impacted. Perhaps service degradation can get worse. Perhaps it can bleed over to other processes in some form or fashion. You may not know that before you create a plan, but if you create a plan, you'll understand what functions put other functions at risk. Organization, functions, and availability. So during impact analysis, it's really important to understand if availability is important for a particular process or service, and when it's important for a process or service. Analyze impact analysis while keeping in mind confidentiality, integrity, and availability requirements for any business process. Your service or your process has specific requirements tied to it. One of those requirements is availability. Consider these things. Does your organization have the option of reducing service availability to determine impact analysis? If you are a web service provider, this may be the worst thing you can do. Maybe you're contractually obligated to have a certain level of uptime. If you're Amazon, maybe your core business is tied to your uptime. Maybe it's so important that you don't lose availability that it will be the most impactful thing that can happen to you. Assuming there's a wider loss of functionality, what functions need to be restored to availability first? If you have a cataclysmic impact across several services or processes, how are you going to deal with that? So another area that businesses will need to determine impact for during an incident is what kind of impact an incident has had on an organization's information. Incidents can affect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your organization's information. And sometimes this is the most important part of a particular organization's existence. Your organization must be able to determine impacts on any particular forms of information involved in an incident. This goes back directly to the impact analysis plan. Information needs to be cataloged, and an impact needs to be assigned to it depending on how important it is to your organization. If information is lost, what's the impact? You need to know that. If information is deleted or degraded or simply stolen in some way, what's the impact to your organization? An incident that results in exfiltration of sensitive information can also affect other organizations. If you've lost data pertaining to a partner or some protected class of persons, what are your requirements for notification when that information is compromised? How do you plan for the impact of that? So create plans that identify who needs to be contacted in the event of these particular pieces of information are compromised. Health information, like we said before, often requires this sort of work. An impact of a financial compromise might be that some of your customers' financial data is stolen, and that requires a whole different set of steps that should be laid out in your impact analysis. So how do you determine information impact? Incident responders can answer some basic questions to help establish a baseline for information impact in a particular incident. First off, reference that plan you made. What is your prior organization